And the critical problem we're trying to solve is the shortage of electricity and the exorbitant cost of electricity, especially for poor people. That is our commitment. Local government is responsible for reticulating energy, but not generating energy. Generating energy was always the responsibility of the national government until Eskom, the monopoly that it is, managed to rack up R500 billion worth of debt. That's almost 500 million rands worth of debt, not through providing good infrastructure and services and generating enough electricity for South Africa's needs, but doing just the opposite, ensuring that we were producing less and less electricity at a higher and higher price, especially for the poor. Now, in that context, as the local government, you don't just sit there and say, well, I'm terribly sorry, we can't reticulate electricity because the central government is not fulfilling its mandate of generating electricity. We said we have to find a new way of generating electricity so that our local governments can fulfill their constitutional mandate of taking that generated electricity and get it to the people. And we're here today because that is exactly what the local government is doing here today. You'll see that surrounding you, there's a lovely view of a sewage pan there that the ducks seem quite happy to be swimming on, so it must be quite well cleaned by now. And here you see these wonderful sun panels. At full capacity, it produces 990 per month, but 1.4 million kilowatt hours a year. Now that's a lot. And I got that statistic before. I got it from the gentleman who's just spoken now, before, and he told me that yesterday was a good day, so it really generated a lot of electricity. And what that saved this plant just for yesterday was 13,000 rand. That is the saving that they generated here that they would otherwise have had to pay buying electricity to run this sewage plant. And of course, the more money you save, the more you save on the cost for the consumer down the line, because that is what we are absolutely committed to doing. When we generate our own electricity and when we save money, we want to help our consumers. And so what we are actually looking at is 380 houses by the surplus energy that this particular plant sells back to the municipality or feeds into the municipality's grid. It supports 380 houses getting full electricity per year. So that is the kind of calculation that the city does. We've got a plant to run, it takes a lot of electricity. We've got space, we've got sun. Generate the electricity, run your plant, and save 13,000 rand a day. You don't use all your electricity, you sell some back to the municipality that can pass on the benefit to other consumers. And so over the long term, as we do that, and as more and more of our facilities generate their own electricity and pump the surplus back into the grid, and more households do that, when you've got the economies of scale, you can provide the alternative to Eskom in hundreds of thousands of small-scale generators who are feeding into the grid and then can pass the cross-subsidy on to the poor. And so that's exactly the innovation that has been happening here in the city of Cape Town and in all the municipalities that you see in front of you and many more. And the one thing they have in common is that they are DA run, because this was an idea that was born a long time ago. What you're seeing here is ideas that were conceptualized at least 10 years ago, planned for, and for which the regulatory environment was put in place, coming to fruition. And we are really delighted to be able to celebrate that here today with mayors who are all doing that in different ways in their municipalities. And that is what we call the DA difference. This is the idea that when you have a problem, you use it as a reason to find an innovative solution. And that is what drives progress. So when I was the Premier of the Western Cape, we realized that we had a big water problem, number one, and we had a big electricity problem. And so we spent a lot of energy putting together the regulatory environment for the entire province to be able to be sure that all the municipalities would be able to simply slip into line and start these kinds of projects because the law and regulations made provision for them, especially for this idea called wheeling. And wheeling is a very important innovation whereby you take the surplus energy generated in one place and you send it across the grid to another place for use there. And not only the state institutions like this one do the generation and the wheeling, but many, many private businesses are now doing it too. And more households are generating sufficient electricity for their own needs and selling their surplus back. And so this has been a wonderful innovation for South Africa. And I've just been at the Africa Summit in London, where I was privileged to have been asked to make an input. And I heard people talk a lot about the just energy transition. And when I spoke to people about what it meant, I realized that we are actually well in advance of the just energy transition. And it wasn't because anybody had to prompt us and persuade us and incentivize us. We were forced because Eskom collapsed to find alternatives and to do that with great innovative speed and great commitment and incredible partnerships between the private sector, individual households, and the local government. And this plant, what you see here, is an absolute leader in the way of that. So instead of consuming a lot of electricity as wastewater treatment plants do, this wastewater treatment plant generates its own electricity, saves 13,000 Rand a day in doing so, and pumps a lot of electricity back for use by other people. And that is why slowly but surely, Cape Town and other municipalities run by the DA could offer you 2 load shedding stages lower than Eskom. And that is a very large part of the reason why today we don't have load shedding anymore, because these kinds of partnerships have come in to make an absolutely massive difference to feeding electricity into the grid. Now you're going to hear from the only municipality in Gauteng that doesn't owe Eskom any money because they're paid up. That's Peter Texera, Midvaal, and you're going to hear from our Mayor Karabi from Drakensberg, our Mayor Rabi. We've got Karabi and Rabi, don't get confused. Rabi from Overstrand, and then of course Jordan Hill-Lewis from the city of Cape Town. But they're not the only places. In Kucha, which is in the Eastern Cape, it's a DA-run municipality. The DA government is on track to launch a 20-megawatt solar PV plant as well as a storage solution. And of course, storage solutions are going to revolutionize the generation of electricity, because one of the very big problems is that we cannot store the energy that we generate, or we could not do that before. And with the new storage solutions, it's going to be revolutionary in trying to achieve more economies of scale and more advantages for the people who need to be serviced most. In Langeberg, small-scale embedded generation agreements have been made with private households, businesses, industry, and the agricultural sector to allow solar installations to feed into the grid. In Saldanha Bay, there is a tender out to appoint an independent power producer that can take on the management of 100% of the grid for the entire municipal area. 100% of the grid on the entire municipal area. And that is really very important because the grid is the nerve center, the highway around which this works. So that's very, very important to have a good functioning grid, and an independent power producer is going to take over the management of the grid. In Cape Agulhas, we're on track to undertake its first grid study to identify all the alternative energy it can bring on board. with the sole purpose of obtaining electricity at a cheaper rate and making the supply to its town more reliable and feasible. And Stellenbosch has just awarded a 20-megawatt independent power producers tender for a solar facility which will enable electricity to be purchased at a lower price than it can from Eskom. And crucially, that helps the poor people most. And in Mossel Bay, we've launched a microgrid project aimed at establishing municipal-owned electricity generating plants to keep key infrastructure going, just as this is today. So these are happening all over the place in DA-run municipalities. And I was invited to a very important breakfast hosted by the Financial Times and Standard Bank in London, where we were speaking about the just energy transition and what is needed to make it happen. And I was very humbled to see how far advanced these municipalities are in driving a just energy transition with very much less of the hype and pressure and drama that is happening around the rest of the world. They are just doing it. And it is going to make an enormous difference. As Eskom has to pay its R500 billion of debt, it retrieves that from the consumers who have paid once for Eskom's corruption, and now they have to pay twice to pay back Eskom's corruption. And we feel that that is entirely unfair, and we've taken it upon ourselves at local government level to go beyond our constitutional mandate so that we can fulfill our constitutional mandate, and so that we can make a just energy transition, we can generate electricity, we can reticulate that electricity, and we can gradually and with great determination bring down the cost of electricity for poor people. Because we don't believe it is right or fair that poor families have to choose between buying food for their children or buying electricity. And so we, as DA governments committed to the poor and doing everything we can to ensure growth and jobs for the poor and affordable living for poor people, have made the energy transition to self-generation one of our key priorities in government.
DA at Work, rescuing South Africa.